The Miscellaneous Reports collection is a large archive of over 770 volumes.
You've got things like pamphlets, maps,
photographs,
handwritten letters.
You'll find little sketches or plans.
Even plant and product specimens stuck down on the page.
It's a very rich source for looking at the history of empire and the history of Kew.
The Miscellaneous Reports collection dates primarily from between the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And it really relates to Kew's role as an arm of government.
They tell this story that relates specifically to Kew's involvement in colonial botany. Sir Joseph Banks is taken on by George III as his botanical advisor. Banks really has this idea that there are all these useful plants all over the world. So you take the useful plant from wherever it is and you transplant it into colonial territories. Using that labour in colonial territories, it's a very profitable undertaking.
There are many voices in the collection, but what is really missing is the voice of the indigenous people. We see their knowledge of plants and plant uses, but they're not credited, and that story is frustratingly hard to discover because of the lack of detail that was recorded about them.
It's important, of course, that we recognise Kew's involvement and that we share that. Be aware of past mistakes and put in place practices that ensures that that won't happen again.
Kew would also be asked to send people, so to recommend gardeners. And a story that has really fascinated me is the story of a gardener with the wonderful name of Edgar Spooner. We see the application form from Edgar Spooner asking to come to Kew. And a couple of years later, he's been sent out to be the superintendent of the Lahore Agricultural Society's gardens. And then you get to a letter which is addressed to the director of Kew at the time, Joseph Hooker. And it reads, "Mr. Edgar Spooner has left Lahore. He will tell you his story. I believe him, and I feel sure that he will not again do that which brought him to trouble. I do not recommend his going back to India, but suggest New Zealand. There he can live and die a happy man. Someday he must leave India, without passion, without interest. His pay is small, he may marry, in fact should marry, and then children come, the wife is ill, expenses, the hills and whatnot. India, the plains, is no place for a European in the position of Edgar Spooner." It was just the most mysterious letter I feel like anybody has ever written. It was a real example of what kind of personal story can be there in the collection.
I'm a conservator for the Miscellaneous Reports collection. A conservator will evaluate it for damage and aim to repair and prevent any future damage that may occur. It can mean considering its long-term storage. My particular favourites have been some of the herbarium specimens. What I found was sometimes the person that was binding hadn't taken account of where the specimen was actually mounted or if it was mounted loose. So there was a couple of instances where I had to very, very carefully extract very brittle leaves from sewing, which was integral to the bindings. And that was a really interesting physical challenge in terms of dexterity.
The collection has a real emphasis on useful, usable plants and plant products, such as tobacco, opium, coffee, rubber, tea. One that I really love is Peru coca, so relating to cocaine. This was a product developed in the 1860s by Angelo Mariani, who's a chemist, but this advertisement dates from 1888. This was a Bordeaux Madeira-based drink. It was a mixture of Madeira or Bordeaux wine combined with the leaves of the Erythroxylum coca plant, and for each ounce of wine it contained over 7 milligrams of cocaine. It was described for its fortifying and strengthening properties peculiarly adapted for the use of children. It's just an example of the real unusual products and stories that you can find in the collection. The future of the collection will be that catalogue records for each volume will be freely searchable online. I think I love my job because each day I'm looking at the raw material of history. I never know what I'm going to come across.
It's such a diverse and interesting collection.
Be prepared to disappear down a few fascinating rabbit holes.
We have the chance to make sure that people in the future have a chance to benefit from the experience of the past.